Welcome to another episode of Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders from NTX Vinyl, a small chain of independent record shops in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. As always, if you don't already subscribe or follow on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, please do. Really appreciate that. And you can also shop online at ntxvinyl.com if you're looking for new and pre-order records. Today's topic: why all vinyl pressings are not created equal. This is probably one of the most confusing parts of the vinyl collecting hobby if you are new to this, or maybe even if you're experienced, is understanding the difference between all of the different pressings that a particular album may have. So an album may have come out in 1970 originally, maybe in 1971 they did an initial repress. The album continued to be popular and it was pressed all throughout the 70s. Eventually, maybe it ran out and kind of tapered off from a sales perspective. Maybe they did a reissue of an anniversary, 20th anniversary reissue in 1990, and then 30th anniversary after that. Point being, there can be many different pressings or reissues of a particular album, and if you're new to the hobby of collecting, it can be very confusing to understand what's the difference between all these. Is there a quality difference? Should I be paying more or less for certain ones? And just in general, getting some clarity around why there are so many different versions. I think that's important for, again, for a new collector or for somebody who's been in this for a while, just wants a better understanding. So I'm going to kind of go through, again, a handful of different things that will help establish why all pressings are not created equal. And it doesn't necessarily always have to do with quality of the audio or the packaging of the pressing, just the fact that they are different, right? So first and foremost, you got to have a little understanding of how a record is made. And so as I walk through this, it's going to go through that process because that's where the differentiation occurs between certain pressings. The first thing to consider when you're pressing an album, to vinyl or really releasing an album in any format is the source files. Like, where does the audio come from? That is the most important part when considering an album. Creating an album, if you're an artist or a record label, when you're putting it out, it's like, where does the audio come from? So in most cases, if an artist is recording analog, that means they're recording to usually 2-inch analog tape, which has, to most people's ears, a much warmer sound, a much more authentic sound. There's also plenty these days, of course, of digital recording tools. Not to say they aren't as good a quality, just different. Again, everyone's ears are different depending on where you're playing, where and how you're playing this music drastically changes the impact of that audio as well. But point being, when you talk about different pressings, the first thing to consider is, where is the audio sourced from? In most cases, you want to look for something on an album, if there is any identifier, that says source from the original masters. Now, those could be analog masters, those could be digital masters, but either way, if it says something like that, it has an indicator that says it was sourced from the original masters, that means that you're starting with the purest source of audio, which obviously is going to be the best source because it hasn't been degraded over time, because it hasn't been over processed or reused over and over. So again, you're going back to the raw file, if you will, as the artist intended it to be heard, right? So that source file is very important. Now, I would say most of the time you don't really know that. It isn't clear as day on the album itself, so you're taking a guess. And even if you do some research and you go on something like Discogs, where you can hopefully look up or find the exact pressing you may be looking at, a lot of times there won't be information on that. So that can be a guessing game. A lot of times people have done some investigative work and figured out if a certain album or certain pressing was sourced from the masters. But again, it's pretty hard to tell at a surface level unless it is identified on the album, which usually it would be on the sticker on front of the album in most cases. Sometimes it would be actually incorporated to the artwork, maybe on the back in the type of credits or something like that. But most of the time it would be on the sticker and put there as a selling point. So the source files are very key. The second element to kind of creating a vinyl record, manufacturing a vinyl record, is then the mastering, right? So you have the audio files, which is what the artist recorded to tape or to digital, whatever that master, wherever that master exists, whatever format it's in, and then it has to go through a mastering process. And mastering is essentially leveling out the audio so that on a variety of different audio systems, whether you're in your car, whether you're listening on earbuds, whether you're listening on a turntable that costs $100 or a turntable that costs $10,000, that the audio is going to be properly set up so that it can live comfortably across all those different formats and be heard through all those different devices, different speakers, and be somewhat normal across them all. You know, you don't want super high highs, you don't want super low lows. You want something that's balanced. You want something that, again, is reflective of the artist's original work. But that mastering step, especially as it pertains to vinyl, is very important. Audio files are mastered differently, for example, for a digital format versus a vinyl or an analog format. And so when you go to get something mastered for vinyl, it's a little bit of a different process, and the audio engineer, the mastering engineer who's handling it, is going to treat it a little differently because it's going to vinyl, because of the median and the amount of audio, the clarity of the audio, everything that goes into making sure it sounds good when you drop the needle on your turntable. So that mastering is very important. Now there are many different mastering engineers. These are audio engineers. They do this for a living, and there are certain ones that are more famous for their mastering techniques and the quality of their mastering. And you know, I think a lot can be said for that. If it's a name that, you know, like a Robert Ludwig is a famous mastering engineer, and a lot of people have grown to know his name, and if you see his marks on the album where it says mastered by Robert Ludwig, you start to understand that, hey, a lot of kind of care was put into that, and there's a pretty good chance that it is going to have a better mastering, a better levels, and just a better sound all around. So, but again, that's pretty in the weeds, right? And that's not up front on the record. So not something that's going to be in your face and very evident as a new collector of good versus bad, right? Most of the time it'll say remastered or mastered, something like that. But every audio engineer, every mastering engineer is different. They have different styles, they have different tastes, they all have different ears, and they hear different things. And so again, why they're all not created equal is because you have one pressing with one audio engineer, one remaster, and then you've got another pressing, you know, a few years or 20 years later of someone else remastering it. Those two people, their ears are completely different, and the systems and then the studios that they're listening to these things are completely different. So that's why you get differences in sound via the mastering, in addition to, you know, where the source files come from. So those first two are all about audio, where the source files come from, and where and how and who masters it. Those are very critical, and those are some of the biggest differentiators between all the different pressings or reissues of an album. Third, this takes it even further, and this gets into the actual physicality and the manufacturing of what are called the stampers. So after the mastering is done, you have your final audio files mastered for vinyl. Then it has to be cut into a mold or a stamper that's then going to actually take the PVC puck of the vinyl itself, which is just rubbery plastic solution, and those stampers are going to squish that vinyl down on both sides and actually imprint the grooves and the music onto those, right? So that process of cutting those stampers is also another process that is very unique, very much an artisan type of a crafty, unique, specific skill that not a lot of people, not a lot of companies, not a lot of manufacturing plants have, right? So that process of getting your stampers made or getting your plates made, there's a lot of different names for them, or getting the album cut, is again a very particular process, and depending on where that's done and how it's done and how meticulously it is cared for when that happens, that's another thing that can differentiate between your pressings. Once again, very much in the weeds. Most people don't know the difference between certain plants that make stampers versus another one. I don't even know that. I know a handful just from being in the business. I know the names of some of these companies that do this. Some of them have better reputations than others, right? But you as a consumer buying records, there's no way you're going to know this stuff. Like, you're lucky if you know you know, where the source was, where the audio was sourced from. Maybe you've got an indicator of who mastered it or remastered it, but you know, something like the cutting isn't going to be very obvious to anyone who's buying a record. Again, if you go into Discogs, look at a particular pressing, maybe look at the notes, someone has identified this stuff, or if you look in the fine print or in the dead wax, these are things that you can attempt to discover, but not in your face, right? So those are all very technical, very ground level, you know, processes of creating a vinyl record, the sourcing, the mastering, and the cutting. Then I would say the one that starts to become very visible, and this is a huge one these days, especially as vinyl, the vinyl industry is so backed up because of the increased demand, is the quality control. Now, quality control is not specific to vinyl manufacturing. It is not specific to even manufacturing as a whole. It is specific to the amount of attention that is paid to something, a project, an item, something you're creating. It doesn't really matter whether it's digital, physical, whatever. The quality control that goes into that process of making sure that all those steps I mentioned already are done properly, and then the actual manufacturing process of when the records are being pressed, when they're in the plant, when they're being handled by real people, when they're being packaged, all those different things, how careful people are, how, again, meticulous people are about caring for the product, and you know, slowing down, not going too fast, so that they're actually mindful of things that go wrong, like a disc being warped, a disc being scratched, you know, dust being on the disc, paper, you know, particles being on the disc, all things that can potentially cause damage to a record, or at least cause a, you know, not superior listening experience, right? The quality control that goes into the pressing of an album is huge. So again, if you've got an album that is originally pressed and comes out in 1970, you know, the pressing in 1971 is probably using the same stampers, same mastering, and same source files, but was the quality control as good? It may have been manufactured in a completely different plant. It may have been rushed for some reason, and the quality control was not as good, and therefore you're not going to get as good a product with the 1971 pressing versus the 70. Same can be said in 2021 versus 2022. Makes no difference. This is a manufacturing staple. Quality control is nothing specific to the vinyl industry. It is something that has to be a certain level of quality has to be maintained no matter what you're manufacturing. So I can't preface that enough. Now, as demand has skyrocketed for vinyl, as far as new pressings are concerned, quality control is absolutely an issue right now. And that's because the plants are working 24 hours a day. They're all understaffed. They're all overbooked. And that creates a scenario where they're trying to work really fast. And when people are trying to work hard and fast and get things done more quickly, that's when quality usually starts to dip. That's just human nature, and that's the nature of the beast, right? So quality control is definitely something to keep in mind. And probably the number one thing, most noticeable thing when I see people, or I'm told, hey, this pressing sounds really bad, or hey, I just opened up this new record and man, it's got these issues with it. Most of the time, not all the time, it has to do with quality control. And that's just the fact of again, of these days, the speed at which plants are trying to produce this stuff, just so they can keep up, right? So quality control is huge. Couple other ones on the back end. Again, if reasons why all pressings are not created equal. Packaging can be a thing. Like there can be a certain album which the album itself, the vinyl, as far as the audio and the cutting and the quality control is great, but they put it in a deluxe packaging, right? So that pressing is not equal to one that's maybe not in a deluxe. Maybe it, you know, they add extra artwork, they change the artwork, they add in different, you know, added value. Maybe there's an obi strip or a different hype sticker or a different insert. So certainly the packaging, which is just the, you know, the sleeve and the jacket and everything that goes into, you know, housing the record, that can absolutely differentiate the pressing. So keep that in mind. And then last but not least, which is even further down the line and even more prevalent today, way more prevalent today than it has been in the past, are the different variants of an album. So you take all those steps that I just walked through, and then you go, okay, now we want one on purple. Now we want one on pink with purple splatter. Now we want one clear with pink and purple splatter. You start to go down all these different variants. So again, if you're thinking about the process, try to imagine yourself in a pressing plant where there's a huge manufacturing process, a whole bunch of different people, and now they're changing things out. They're changing out colors. They're swapping out, having to clean machines and get in there, get their hands dirty, and change all of these settings to swap for a different color. Sometimes it's simple. Sometimes it's more complicated depending on the variant or the variance of that specific pressing. They're changing the color or the style or the effect or whatever. All of those things, there's room for error in all of those things. So there may be a new album that comes out and it's got 2 or these days 10 different variants. There is potential that one variant could sound better than another, or have been one variant could have been quality controlled better than another, just based on the fact that there could be different people working. They could have been done on different presses. They could have been done at completely different plants. So again, anytime you add variables into a manufacturing process of any kind, there is an opportunity for error. There is an opportunity for a difference in quality. Again, maybe not better or worse, but just different. So as I think about the kind of process of creating a vinyl record and all the steps that go into it, all of those things impact the idea that, again, all pressings are not created equal. And I'm not saying necessarily originals are always better or represses are always worse. I've got a video on that topic as far as really talking about the quality, but this is more about just understanding why they differ. So again, if you're a new record collector and you walk into a Walmart, you walk into a record store, you're shopping online and you see that it says 2014 reissue. What does that mean? Well, what that means is not all the time, but a lot of the times, all these steps are done differently on that 2014 reissue than, let's say, the original version that came out in 1970. Again, same example. Does that mean it's going to be better or worse? That's debatable, and that's really up to your ears, right? So if you're going to take the chance on that record and you're going to commit to it, if it sounds great on your system, hey, you made a good investment. That's the other key element to all of this. All of these factors go into the conversation around whether or not a pressing is better or worse, or just how different it is. And then they're all impacted holistically based on what you play the record on. Because I may get a pressing that sounds phenomenal on my turntable. Someone else may put it on their turntable and their speakers and their amp, and it sounds different, right? Maybe to their ears it doesn't sound different. And so that's the other caveat here. And I think all of these things too, it's important to say that it's from an audio perspective, maybe not the quality control, because that can be visual if you literally see an album that's warped or has marks on it or something. But as far as the sound is concerned in the audio, again, what the vinyl is being, what the record is being played on has such a drastic impact. Now, I'm not saying that someone with $100 or a $500 turntable inherently has a less enjoyable experience than someone with a $10,000 player. What I'm saying is it's no different than a movie, right? When there's a blockbuster film, maybe it's a Marvel movie or something like that, it's created with so much care and love, and it is intended to be viewed on a huge screen to see the detail, to really feel the impact. So much time and effort, painstakingly, all of the hours spent going into creating that film. And then a lot of people, for better or worse, may just watch it on their phone. They just may want to watch it on a screen this big. Now, will they still enjoy it? It could certainly be enjoyable. But to the producer and the filmmaker and the director and the actors who are involved in that film, that everybody went into it, do you think they would prefer for it to be watched on that? Do you think, they want people to watch it on their phone? No, they want people to experience it as it's meant to be experienced, which is maybe in a theater on a big screen TV, right, with a good sound system, because they put so much time and care into that. It's no different than an album. An artist would love for every single person who spins their record to be on a $20,000 audio file system. The reality is that's just not going to happen, right? It's very few and far between. But that doesn't mean someone who has a moderate system that costs a few $100s, if it sounds good to your ears and that's what you've got, then enjoy it, right? And so regardless of how different the pressings are, regardless of maybe what the reviews say, just depend on your ears. Just listen to it on the turntable and the speakers and in the environment that you have. And if you enjoy it, then it's a good pressing for you. And that's what's most important, regardless of what other people are going to say, regardless of people say, oh, that's just a reissue. It doesn't matter. If it sounds good to you, enjoy it, share it, and experience that album. And I guarantee you, the artist who originally created that art would love to hear that, regardless if you're spending it on a $200 turntable or a $20,000 turntable. That's the way I feel about it. That's the way I treat my records. I've got plenty of records where, I cherish an original pressing of a certain album, but man, I may have a reissue of it that's on a different color, or maybe it's just a different pressing altogether that sounds great too, and I appreciate that one just as much. And so these are all things to consider when you're thinking about buying records or when you're learning about the hobby, and hopefully this has been helpful to break down kind of, again, the differences between certain pressings and again, how they are all not created equal. So that's talking about records. I would love to hear your comments and feedback, as always, on this topic. If you've got something to add, which certainly you will, please let us know in the comments, and we'll see you again next time on Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders. Thank you so much for listening.